Can I just draw your attention to the next one, the title of which is From Rightsholders to Storytellers, Navigating the New Era of Sports Content. We will all have seen it, we'll all have been touched by it, and I'm sure a lot of you will be very, very interested to hear from two people well qualified to talk on this subject. Lee Korman is Director, Content Partnerships at the PGA Tour, and Isabelle Stewart, who's Head of Original Content at F1. Would you give them a very warm welcome to the stage, please? Isabelle and Lee, come on up. I shall sit you in the middle. Nice to see you. Thank you very much indeed for being with us today. And thank you everyone once again for grabbing a seat, getting yourselves comfortable. We've had a lot of very good topics today, but it feels like this one is one that's got a lot of lights around it. It feels very much that the time is now. So can I just start with both of you first of all? Just give us a little précis of your job. Give us a little sort of breakdown of what this title means to you. Tell us why you're here today and how it fits into what you're doing.
Hello, everyone. I'm Isabelle Stewart. I head up original content at Formula One. So my role is to continue to drive revenue and, even more importantly, build fandom and build reach and diversity within fandom through storytelling. And F1 is a rights holder. We control all the media rights of the sport. And an increasingly important part of becoming a fan and deepening engagement with the sport is through stories. So in that sense, I think as a rights holder, storytelling is absolutely crucial to continue growth.
Fantastic. What would you add to that, Lee?
Similar for us at the PGA Tour in terms of we're a rights holder. We have a responsibility as marketers within there to talk about our product. Like a lot of rights holders, we have a number of broadcast partners who are subscription-based. So from a content perspective, our role is to take our product, our talent, our athletes over and above that, so that we can kind of market ourselves for free, bring people into the kind of consumption space with our broadcast partners, and ultimately continue to increase the PGA Tour and its kind of standing within the golfing and the sporting world.
Okay. Can I throw it straight onto Drive to Survive, which has been, the smile says it all in some ways, it's been a phenomenon. Can you just break that down to us in the impact that you have seen since Drive to Survive has come along? Where do you start in trying to assess its impact?
Well, firstly, I wish I could take credit for Drive to Survive, but Drive to Survive existed long before I joined Formula One 2.5 years ago. I think it was one of those things that was a great idea, but I don't think anyone expected the impact it had. And it's been, I'd say, an important part of a growth strategy that happened when Liberty Media bought the sport in 2018. And so it's not necessarily an impact we can attribute in isolation to Drive to Survive, but it has played a fundamental role, particularly in the US. And we've seen in the US phenomenal growth in the last sort of 3 to 5 years.
Can you put some numbers on that in terms of the eyeballs watching it, fan engagement? What are percentages are we talking?
Rather than percentage, I can say that in sort of the last 3 years, our fan base has kind of ballooned to an audience of 800 million worldwide. 42% of our fan base is female globally. 42% of our fan base is now under 35. And that's globally. So in the US, where there's a bigger majority of new fans, I think even globally, 1 in 3 fans has become a fan in the last 4 years. So the reach has been phenomenal. And yeah, I think it's just been an incredible journey, and I think it's very rare because on Netflix it really stays really consistent year on year, series on series, which is quite unusual in terms of the audience, and we always get a spike. People actually are rewatching seasons like 1 to 5 when season 6 comes out. So yeah, it's been a super important part of a wider growth strategy.
Can I ask you a genuine question? And I know you weren't necessarily there, but when F1 set out with Drive to Survive, the numbers that you've referenced there, was that the target or has that been luck?
I'm not privy to Liberty's growth targets when they acquired the sport. I would say they didn't necessarily expect that level of growth that quickly.
Right.
But I think when Liberty bought F1, they saw huge potential that had been under exploited. So
Okay.
I can't track that to specific numbers they had. But I think Drive to Survive has overperformed in terms of its contribution. But I think Liberty Media saw a massive potential in Formula One.
Wow. What about Full Swing for golf? How would you compare and contrast the impact it's had relative to Drive to Survive?
Not the same numbers. I think there was a period when prior to me joining the tour, there was a period when I was in agency meetings, and I think Drive to Survive was mentioned on an hourly basis as I think the standard bearer of the kind of sports documentary. Full Swing is, I think we feel we rank third, so Drive to Survive, Tour de France Unchained, and then Full Swing. There's different metrics in different markets. I think the kind of Drive to Survive effect that we've seen actually is around our players. The PGA Tour, we don't have our players contractually bound to give up their time outside of what they do inside the ropes, and it's a bit of a hot topic at the moment with Rory McIlroy and other players talking about their requirement to do media activity, which people might have seen. So I think what Drive to Survive did for us and perhaps other documentaries is it kind of opened the players' eyes to the fact that if they are generous with their time and they let the crews near them, then actually they can reap some of the rewards in terms of their own profile. And I think you see that with the caliber of our players who have been involved with Full Swing. You know, it is the kind of the top of the top. And I think without Drive to Survive, I'd maybe question whether that would have happened.
And what about the impact that Full Swing has had? Have you seen younger people playing more golf? Have you seen a greater engagement with what you're doing online? Where have you seen the numbers come
we
through?
measure it based on the number of people who consume PGA Tour content rather than participation basis. And that has increased. I mean, in the UK, there is a 20% jump from people who have watched Full Swing and gone from not watching a PGA Tour event to watching a PGA Tour event. So I think that we consider that a success. I guess in the bigger context, so golf is enjoying a bit of a boom. You know, there's various reasons for it. Kind of participation around the pandemic, I think, was one of the silver linings to a very dark cloud around that time. And there's various kind of RNA stats around that. So I guess for us, whilst we're not measured on our ability to bring people into the game to play it, clearly that has an effect in terms of the audience who are looking at the cream of the crop of PGA Tour players.
I don't necessarily want to ask you to critique other sports, but from a personal perspective, obviously rugby union had its opportunity with Full Contact on Netflix, and I think first season they were very reluctant to let cameras in change rooms, and perhaps understandably so. The second season they tried to be a bit more relaxed with it, but by then the decision had been made that there wasn't going to be a third season, and it feels like a great opportunity for a sport that needs it has fallen by the wayside. When you look at why Drive to Survive took off, what was the secret ingredient? It's not really a participation sport, is it? But what was it that ignited it in the public's conscience, do you think?
I think there's lots of answers to that. I think the sport is it's almost unfair to other sports. It's uniquely, I think it's a unique fit for the format. So, you generally, the athletes in Formula One have helmets on, that's all you get to see. Formula One suddenly provides an opportunity to get to know the driver helmet off. I think also Formula One, the edits that you get are often a kind of more exciting way of watching the sport than watching the race, or at least it kind of really sings in the edits. Whereas if you're watching, I can't really speak to golf, but when you're watching tennis, you want to see the whole point. And so like an edited version of that match is never going to be more exciting really than watching that amazing, back and forth in real time. So I think the sport as well lends itself to these edits. I think we have a unique dynamic within the sport in terms of you've got the athletes in the car. It's actually a team sport. You've got the athletes in the car. You've got the engineers on the radio. You've got the mechanics in the garage, and you've got the team principals working on strategy. All of these are, playing out throughout the race. And I think that's something that takes quite a long time to understand, and to deepen your understanding of the sport if you just switch it on. Whereas Drive to Survive really unpacked that and really put the team principals as other personalities to the fore, and the team principals in Formula One are amazing characters. So again, you had a whole other set of characters to kind of tell the story of Formula One. So I think it's that range that we really have to play with. And I'd say also we really benefited from good timing. It's certainly in the US. I think the third series of Drive Survive came out during the pandemic. People were hungry for content. They had series 1 and 2 to catch up. And then I think it was that summer that Formula One was the first sport to go back live. So you kind of transition from everyone kind of people discovering season 3, catching up season 1 and 2, and then suddenly the sport's live. So that moment during COVID, I think, was, it just worked really well into building, like accelerating that US discovery, because I don't think the first 2 seasons were as strong in the US at all.
You make a really interesting point there about the drivers and the team principals. Am I right in saying that at the very beginning, there weren't that many teams that were that happy about opening up to access all areas? And therefore, what was the inflection point where everyone suddenly said, I get it, we are now all in?
So certainly Series 1 didn't have Ferrari or Mercedes. And actually, I've heard Box to Box say this before, in a way, focusing on the midfield and some teams at the back of the field forced them to kind of tell different types of stories that weren't just about who's winning the race. So I really think that led to a pivot and a richness to the variety of stories that ended up really benefiting the series. And then I think once Ferrari and Mercedes saw the tone, saw the success, saw the engagement, then I think they were much more comfortable in participating. But I think in the end, it ended up being a really useful outcome that they were more cautious at the start.
Okay, interesting.
I'll just jump in as well, because I think we felt similar with Full Swing in that it was actually the story around some of the players who had lesser profiles that were most kind of resonated best with the audiences. Joel Damon, who's one of our players, who's perhaps not a household name, and his caddy Gino Bonelli had a fascinating story that I think probably made one of the better episodes. I think the other point as well about team principles is that we look on often enviously at other sports and other sports documentaries, because there is such an array of characters around the sport, whereas obviously in golf you've got the player and you've got the caddy, and then the families who are sometimes up for being on camera, sometimes not, but it does mean you have quite a high reliance on the players to kind of carry the story. Whereas I think some of the threads around team principles, or the behind the scenes teams in Drive to Survive and other sports, can kind of just is super additive to what you see on screen, and that's kind of typical of golf. Away from Full Swing as well. We don't have teams who are kind of creating their own content and doing their own marketing and kind of tapping into that fan, that kind of partisan feeling. So there's us as the rights holder, there's the players as players, and then there's a bit of a chasm between them. So as a rights holder, we've got to help create these stories, but obviously remain impartial, because we don't want to be seen to support one player over another.
Okay. I've got a 12-year-old boy. I'm sure many of you have got kids and friends, etc. I cannot get over how much golf content he is consuming on YouTube right now. And actually, funny enough, whenever I click on, obviously, was it Bryson who was hitting it over his house, trying to hit the hole in one? That was sort of appointment. You had to keep watching it. I used to work many years ago with Tubes, who was obviously a star on Soccer AM. Used to work in the tape library at Sky, and is now printing money, playing golf on a daily basis with Jimmy Bullard and footballers. And I find it absolutely extraordinary how golf, which traditionally has been perceived in a certain way, has had this kind of online revolution through YouTube. Tell me how that fits into your world and how PGA are trying to be a part of that.
I think 10 years ago, there was a kind of them and us feeling to it. And I think now we have had to embrace it. I think our business is predicated on our media rights. Our Sky Sports pay a lot of money to broadcast PGA Tour golf in the UK, and similar story in other markets. So we need to protect their exclusivity to a degree. However, there is this huge audience that the likes of Tubes and Ange, the Peter Finches of this world have all got, and so that content will be created and those audience will be served whether we're involved or not. So, there's a strategic shift in the last couple of years to lead into that. We've got activations at our tournaments like the Creator Classic, which people might have seen, where we have YouTubers, predominantly US, and we're kind of flying the international flag, but participating on the Wednesday of PGA Tour tournaments kind of on our courses, and that's a kind of made for YouTube activity that is is a world away from what we'd have seen even a few years ago. We've got the Creator Council, which is a kind of body of creators that we work with closely so that we can understand how to be better partners to them, understand what they need from us. So, it's finding that balance between protecting the interests of our media partners who, pay the majority of our revenue, I guess, but equally not being blind to the fact that the online audience is the kind of present and the future of golf.
Just on that, do you see in your world the rising tide of content creators across the board floating all boats, or do you see actually some are taking chunks out of each other?
As the former, and I think golf is a minority sport. We encourage and welcome as many people making content as possible. And I think one of the great things about golf as a golf fan is there's so many different angles into golf content. You can look at instructional content. How people view on their iPhones now is like made for a golf swing. It's a vertical videos, and that kind of is, there's any number of golf instructional content, but then you look at the kind of tour highlights or behind the scenes stuff that we would do. You look at kind of golf lifestyle, fashion, golf humor. There's so many different touch points to it. And a PGA Tour tournament is 4 days long. There's a lot of time to consume that shoulder content around it, whereas, other sports, it's a bit of a, it's a mad dash. You're pretty fixed in terms of what happens on the track or, on the pitch, whereas we create content to complement our broadcasts. And so, we are all for this kind of, get close to saturation of content kind of in the golf ecosystem.
Because of the exclusivity of F1, though, do you find that you have a more defensible position when it comes to content? Is that a good thing or a bad thing, or is that not really relevant?
What do you mean by exclusivity?
In terms of the fact it's harder for people to, anyone can pick up a golf club and create content, but it's harder for those outside the sport to create content probably in F1 that will cut through to the same extent that those who are in the middle doing it. Do you know what I mean?
Sorry, is your question that it's harder for content creators to create content around Formula One just because they're not like in Formula One cars?
Yes,
around?
that's the question. Yeah.
I've actually never really thought about it that way before because we have so many content creators creating so much content, and so much of that is talking about all the the strategy, the business decisions, the races. They come to I think there's so much going on at a race weekend. It's, to Lee's point, it's kind of 3-day event, and we have a Formula One weekend. It's a bit like going to a festival. You have concerts, you have stages, there's like various track activities, like the different practices and the sprints, etc. So there's so much opportunity at track to create content once they attend. So probably it is more focused around attending a race weekend in terms of content creators who we're not working with directly. We're also starting to work with, kind of choice content creators on developing series that are around the world of Formula One that we're in partnership with. And that, it's telling all the stories about travel maybe, or fashion. I think there's so many touch points about Formula One. I don't think actually access to the car is that limiting.
Okay. What role do brands play in the way that you look at content?
So my role, I sit in media rights, so I'm not necessarily working with brands day in, day out. But I would say that the kinds of brands that are working with F1 now as partners, like Disney, for example, which we announced this year. I've sat this morning in a meeting with the big team there, and all their planning for next year in terms of where they're going to show up on track and all the storytelling around that and all the publishing opportunities. I think in that sense, the partners we're now attracting are kind of more embedded in storytelling and culture. LVMH, there's all our partners have a kind of branded content element to the partnership agreement. And I think with a company like LVMH, the branded content opportunity there, it might start bleeding a little bit more into my area in terms of, really premium, elevated branded content. The other thing is, I mentioned before, we're starting to work with some kind of choice content creators. It might be that we bring on a brand, it's kind of an additional asset, a new asset. We bring on a brand to kind of sponsor that content. I did a deal with Condé Nast last year to develop original bespoke short form content under their biggest brands. So formats with Vogue, GQ, Wired, and Traveller. I mentioned, travel as a subject area. So we're working with Condé Nast on these 4 original formats that are kind of in the world of Formula One, but we might bring on a brand to sponsor those formats. And I'd say that, in the content that I'm more focused on, like long-form film and TV, I think, for those of you who might have seen Formula One, the movie, that in a way, I think something I didn't predict, but is obvious now in retrospect, is that film and TV provide a whole new suite of assets for existing partners and new partners. So, the fictional team in the movie has all sorts of brand partners. They showed up massively in the movie, so that ended up being a really significant part of the revenue for us, for Apple, for the producers. And lastly, I'd say that streamers are, initially weren't really interested in obviously advertising or brand integration. That's something that's very traditional in, Channel 4 content, etc. They've now, as everyone knows, are switching their strategies, bringing in ads revenue. And on F1 The Academy, we saw Amex, who's a partner of F1 Academy, come in and be a series title sponsor and feature as brand integration. So on the long-form content as well, actually, we're starting to work with brands more and more.
Fantastic. And obviously the F1 movie is going to be fascinating to watch. We are tight for time. I'm being wrapped up very quickly. But you've obviously got Happy Gilmore, I suppose, as the PGA alternative to the F1 movie.
We have.
What is next, though, for you in terms of content and golf? Just quickly.
I mean, I can only speak from kind of my role and my team's role at the PGA Tour. We have a brilliant remit of content partnerships, which is where we can align with brands, not from a revenue generation perspective, but from an audience growth perspective. And so it allows us and the team to cherry pick brands that we want to work with that take golf and the PGA Tour into different audiences. So example is we did a kind of travel documentary with Manners, a kind of challenger golf apparel brand that people might have seen, shortlisted for Sport Industry Awards, criminally beaten by someone called Jude Bellingham, who people may have heard of. But it allows us to kind of go into a kind of different storytelling space and bring in other audiences to kind of the PGA Tour world. Not quite sure if there's a F1 movie PGA Tour equivalent in the pipeline or who would play the Brad Pitt role, but excited if that materialises in the next decade.
Watch this space.
Exactly.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant. A really interesting insight into navigating the new era of sports content. Will you give a huge round of applause once again to Lee and to Isabelle. Enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you very much indeed.